Making your way through an endless stream. Silence cuts reality, but it seems only for a moment. Moments always seem to fade away. Searching for the picture, always out of reach. Holding on to freedoms that yours to keep. Oh, only for a moment. Moments always seem to fade away. Push through a door into an empty street. No one's there to meet you 'cause you're still asleep. But only for a moment, moments always seem to fade away.
Goodness gracious, still figuring it out. Hey everyone, Greg Staley here from Diverge Media. Sorry about that. We are going to get started with the Liberal platform today. Just a heads up about election coverage tomorrow. I will not be able to be bringing you coverage, so tune into another outlet that you like, that you believe will give you a good representation of what's going on, as I will be scrutineering for the election. So I will be watching what's going on. But let's get into it here, starting with the Liberal platform. Obviously, we're breaking down today. So I've gone through the Liberal platform. Just recently, they put up a actual PDF version. But before that, it was like 40 or 50 separate tabs that you had to go into. And needless to say, it was difficult to deal with. But continuing forward here, let's check out the platform. All right, so starting with mandatory vaccination and proof of vaccination. It will require that travelers on interprovincial trains, commercial flights, cruise ships, and other federally regulated vessels be vaccinated. We're familiar with this. It's been pretty out in the open with that. But ensure vaccination across the federal public service. Proof of vaccination systems, it says, give people the confidence of knowing that others around them are fully vaccinated. They also help drive increased vaccination rates and give Canadians confidence that it's safe to go to restaurant shops and out in their communities. So on this topic of the increased vaccination rates, I mean, personally, I'll interject a little bit here. It's no surprise that they increase vaccination rates, as it you're being coerced into it. There's no other way to put it. If you're worried about your job or being able to provide for your family, and that's the reason you go out and get this, I mean, they might pat themselves on the back that we did that. But at the end of the day, it's coercion. There's nothing else to say about that. But let's get back into it. Protect businesses and organizations from fear of legal challenge. Okay. Now this one should stand out to you, because this would fundamentally change our legal system. The government doesn't get to decide what can be challenged in a court of law. Here they are in the Liberal platform saying they want to protect businesses and organizations from fear of legal challenge. This would fundamentally change the legal system, and I'm not even sure that it's possible to do it, but nonetheless, it's in the Liberal platform. Table legislation to ensure that every business and organization that decides to provide proof of vaccination from employees and customers can do so without fear of legal challenge. There you go, straight in the Liberal platform. Check it out yourself. Again, this is my summary of notes. Most of these are direct quotes right pulled from the Liberal platform that stood out to me. So most of what you see in here is going to be direct quotes, and very few of it's going to be, very little of it's going to be my opinion on it. But I will give you my opinion, obviously, in this video. Getting back to your invest $100 million to study the long-term health impacts of COVID-19, including the effects of long COVID. Now, on this topic, they were talking about long COVID, and they include anxiety and depression, believe it or not, are included as symptoms of long COVID. So, I mean, who who gets this money, $100 million to study the effects of long COVID? It's not that it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, just so you know, on the definition of this, anxiety and depression are included as symptoms. And also, you can look up, long influenza symptoms. Things. Well, let's see if we can find it. Long flu symptoms. Because I remember doing research on this. Yeah, long influenza, maybe they call it. Long influenza syndrome. Post-viral syndrome. All right, let's pull that up. Sorry, everyone, switch the screen here. Post-viral syndrome. What to know about post-viral syndrome. Post-viral syndrome or post-viral fatigue refers to a sense of tiredness and weakness that lingers after a person has fought off a viral infection. It can arise after common infections such as the flu. People may experience post-viral symptoms such as fatigue for weeks or months after fighting off the infection. Some treatments and home remedies may relieve fatigue and help people manage their energy levels. Okay, again, I just want to pop that in there because $100 million in the Liberal platform is designated to study long-term health impacts of COVID-19. Now, you could say it's a novel virus. They want to study it and understand more. I'm not sure how $100 million is going to be used, but buckle up. There's lots of that here in the Liberal platform of money going out for things that maybe don't make the most sense to me, but maybe they make sense to our viewers here. Better mental health support for students. So they want to introduce a new fund for student well-being. They say to improve wait times and increase access to mental health care at colleges and universities. The fund will support the hiring of up to 1,200 new mental health care counselors. Again, so there you go. That's one of their proposals for mental health, better mental health for students, they say. Continuing down here, invest $6 billion on top of the $4 billion already committed to support the elimination of health system wait list. No explanation is given to how throwing more money at this problem will yield results. They say they also want to negotiate agreements with every province and territory to ensure that Canadians who are waiting for care get the treatment they need as quickly as possible. Yes, another vague assertion that doesn't tell us Canadians how this goal will be accomplished. But in the platform there, they want to invest $6 billion additional dollars to support the elimination of health system wait list. I'm not sure how they're going to. They want to eliminate the backlogs of surgeries that have been caused by the lockdowns that they advocated for and have been pushing. And so, now they got to figure out where, the $6 billion. I'm not sure how that actually gets used. I'm not sure that can actually get rid of a wait list. I'm not sure just money is the solution there if you don't have the doctors, nurses, and staff required to get the job done. But continuing on here, expand virtual healthcare services. The Liberal government will, quote, provide $400 million over 4 years to build on the growing demand for virtual care that arose during the pandemic. Now, I'll add this here. If virtual care is not the default of the healthcare system, but a supplemental addition to the system, it definitely has a place. I mean, it definitely has a place because, if you're in a rural area and it's a simple checkup, and maybe that's the preliminary step is to reach out to your doctor, but maybe you want to go in person. So my issue with this virtual healthcare expansion is there's a lot of doctors, at least in my personal experience, you can leave your comments in the comments section, that would prefer to do virtual care visits. They want a telehealth visit, kind of like meeting with you on the phone before they'll even have you into the office. And so you don't want to lose that doctor-patient relationship as a result of virtual healthcare. So there's a balancing act. There's definitely a place. It can have a place in our healthcare system. It can probably alleviate some of the issues as far as like getting in to get some medical advice. But virtual care is not the same as in-person care, and then you're not developing the same relationship as you would in person. But continuing on here, They say they want to support more virtual care so that Canadians can access things like virtual medical consultations with doctors and nurses or remote monitoring. Again, no issue with that, so long as it is a choice and it's not the default of the medical system or default of a doctor to prefer that method. Need to be taking in patients if requested to see them in person. Now, they also touch on rural access to healthcare. Pull this down here again. The Liberal platform says that rural Canadians have significantly less access to doctors than Canadians in urban settings. So they propose to increase by 50% from $40,000 up to $60,000 over 5 years the maximum debt relief that family doctors, residents in family medicine, nurse practitioners, or nurses are eligible for under the Canada Student Loans Forgiveness Program. Now, I actually, again, here now, this is not a bad idea. This is not a bad idea to propose that doctors be able to write off some more of their student loan expenses. I don't know. I reached out to the Liberal Party on this if it only qualifies to rural doctors, but in general, there could be an incentive to try to get more people into the medical system if they knew their student loans were going to be written off. I mean, it's a tough call. We're short on doctors, we're short on nurses, and this is a time-sensitive thing. You want more in the system. So this is the Liberals' proposal on that: 50% up from 40 to 60,000 over 5 years for the maximum debt relief that family doctors, residents in family care, nurse practitioners, or nurses are eligible for under the Canada Student Loans Forgiveness Program. Not a perfect solution, costs the taxpayer money, but again, we are drastically understaffed. Now, does that mean that actually transfers to doctors and nurses and practitioners in the health system? Not per se, because the government's the one paying them. So I want to touch on that next, because they want to expand the list of professionals eligible for forgiveness to include dentists, pharmacists, dental hygienists, midwives, social workers, psychologists, teachers, and childhood educators. I said it's not clear if everyone who applies that falls under these titles will qualify, or only the ones that work in the rural areas. I have reached out again to the Liberal Party for confirmation. I will not hear back. I almost guarantee it. So do with that what you will. And then next, a one-time tax deduction of up to $15,000 over the first 3 years of practice to healthcare professionals just starting out their career who is deemed a new healthcare professional. So trying to, again, being a doctor and going to school, very time intensive, very labor, very expensive. And so, and opening up a practice, all the different overhead costs they have, insurance for malpractice, they have, their overhead costs of actually having a building. So again, whether you agree or disagree that this is the right way to go about it, their proposal here is a one-time tax deduction of up to $15,000 over 3 years of practice for healthcare professionals just starting out their career. And then punish professionals. This was the one I wanted to bring up here on this topic. Punish provinces, because again, it's not necessarily bringing more doctors in to cut the costs down on debt relief. Now, if you knew you could go private, and maybe I personally have proposed something to the effect of kind of like a lottery system. I think the fear on privatization it kind of goes like something like this: if we privatize any element of our healthcare here in Canada, doctors, good doctors, nurses, etc., will leave the public system because the private system was going to be more lucrative. Now, that's the case. Sure, that's fine. The case, maybe you could make the case of a lottery system. Maybe you would make it so that, we only allow so many. I don't know what the answer is, but that is kind of the concern over privatization, is that there will be an exodus from the public system into the private. They won't come out and say this, because guess what? You can make a heck of a lot more money as a private practitioner than you can as a public one in the Canadian healthcare system. So the government's not going to come out and say, listen, hey guys, it would be much more lucrative for you to be private, and we're terrified that if we open up any private healthcare in Canada, you're all going to flood to the private system. They don't talk like that. So maybe there could be a lottery system that kind of gets them in there. But this is why I bring that up, because the Liberals' platform says they want to punish provinces who offer private healthcare services, and they strengthen federal powers under the Canada Health Act and the Federal Provincial Fiscal Arrangements Act to deduct health transfers from provinces who enable extra billing for publicly insured services. Let that sink in. They want to be able to deduct health transfer money from the provinces if they enable any extra billing for publicly insured service, meaning if it is publicly covered somewhere, even if there is a drastic shortage of, for instance, surgeons or you name it. Maybe it's like a 5-year wait list to get in for the surgery you need. Well, liberals say, we don't care. We don't want private here. We will deduct health transfers from the provinces to enable any extra billing for publicly insured services. So that's their solution, or that's their proposal on private healthcare. They're very, very against private healthcare at all being a supplement to the public system. Now, the flip side of that, they say in order to protect the integrity of our universal public healthcare system, kind of like what I just touched on there, is that they are concerned about, I think, an exodus, and that's why I think you're seeing them say to protect the integrity of our universal public healthcare system. The reality is, they can work in tandem together as long as we're not losing doctors or nurses. So if you can bring in more doctors and nurses at the same time that you open up private, and then you ensure that the public isn't going to lose all the good, doctors that are in it through maybe a lottery system or something like that. I'm not saying that's a great solution, but if we're going to keep the public healthcare system, there needs to be a balance there. Now, the flip side of that is private can work and complement the public health system. So I'll leave that out there. But, if there's a wait time of 2 years, let's say on surgery for whatever, pick your surgery, and then there's a public health system. And let's just say, for argument's sake, 1 out of 4 people, 25% of people could afford and would walk away and go into the private system, pay additional money that they weren't ever going to put into the Canadian healthcare system, pay taxes on these services, and then we would watch a reduction of 25% on the wait list on the public side. That could be a possibility. But again, there's a balancing act to be had here. The Liberals don't see a balancing act. They say any province that wants to do this, we will deduct health transfers from if they enable any extra billing for publicly insured services. So that is the Liberal approach to private public healthcare. They don't want anything to do with private healthcare. And I think it is something, like I said, they're worried about an exodus. They say in order to protect the integrity of our universal public healthcare system. And I disagree with their summary and where they've gotten to on that. But I also understand the fear, and maybe they just don't have a good solution, so they don't offer one. Continuing on here, provide up to $10 million to Health Canada to develop an easily accessible portal that provides judgment-free, evidence-based information on sexual and reproductive health rights, which will include a section that counters misinformation about abortion. Again, not sure what they mean by misinformation about abortion, but here it's a goodie grab bag type thing out of an election. $10 million provided. And then they got another one, provide up to $10 million over 3 years to youth-led grassroots organizations that respond to the unique sexual and reproductive health needs. Now, they no longer want to provide charity status to, they say, anti-abortion organizations, for example, crisis pregnancy centers. So it's been talked about before. Now, a crisis pregnancy center, they will not provide abortions, but they do provide many other public health services around pregnancy, and they're allowed charitable status under the current laws. Now, whether you agree with that or not, they just say this is the Liberals' approach. They say we no longer want to provide charity status, they say, to anti-abortion organizations. Again, that's a tough one. If you're advocating for somebody to try to keep their baby, I get how you get to the point where you say that's anti-abortion, but I'm not sure that just because somebody wouldn't advocate for something means they're anti. So I think, again, it's kind of like there can be a complementary system here, same way in a private public health care, but the Liberals don't see it that way. So we'll continue on here. Yes, and I agree. That's which is good. Abortion shouldn't be the only option. Yeah. So, and that's exactly it. Again, and now there's an example or the difference of, like, if they're like, don't do this, and they make people feel terrible about a decision, that's one thing. But if they're presenting the information, they say, this is what's happening. This is where things are at in your pregnancy. Here's the potential health risk to you. with this procedure, and they're just advocating based on factual information and presenting a different counterpoint, that completely should be allowed in the Canadian system. I realize some people get uncomfortable about this topic, but I mean, the more uncomfortable we get about the topics, the more important the conversations are to have. Moving on, let's get into maybe some stuff that's not as intense. Mental health care. They want to establish a new, let's pull it down here for everyone. So we'll just try to keep the topic at hand at the top here. Mental health care. Establish a new federal transfer to provinces and territories, the Canada Mental Health Transfer, to assist jurisdictions to expand the delivery of high quality, accessible, and free mental health services. Again, this is like a vague, kind of generic, overlapping statement. Well, establish a new federal transfer to provinces. Okay, for how much? For how long? Is it annual? Is it a one-time fee? The Canada Mental Health Transfer, they say to assist jurisdictions to expand the delivery of high-quality, accessible, and free mental health services. Okay, by when you say expand, this sounds like they're talking about pre-existing. So what are those pre-existing services that they plan on making more accessible? Is it something Canadians would really get behind? Do they think those services are worth expanding? Again, kind of vague and generic. So I want to be as open and honest as I can about the platform, and I'll tell you what I do think is good and what I do think is bad. Doing my best to be fair on this. Obviously, I have my bias. You're going to be able to pick up on my bias, but I'm going to do my best to present a balanced approach to these topics. I think it's important. I think it does a disservice to Canadians when we can't have conversations about politics that we may disagree with. Now, long-term care. No, this is okay. Here we go. I call this. I said, is this a potential job killer? Now, this is a direct quote from the Liberal platform. They want to include mental health as a specific element of occupational health and safety under the Canada Labour Code and require federally regulated employees to take preventative steps to address workplace stress and injury. Now, I really want the audience here to think about this here for a second. Now, you might agree off the hop and say, listen, yes, there's a lot of workplaces, Greg, that take advantage of their workers. They work them into the ground. It causes them, anxiety and stress, and mental health is a prominent issue in today's society, and I think this is the right approach. Now, what I would say to you is I've worked in a lot of jobs that I would say were mentally terrible. Like, I hated them with a passion. And I've worked in factories. Full disclosure, I've worked on a pig farm. Where I was at the time, there was no jobs in the area. Took in my brother, wanted him to be able to stay in his school district, so I took the only job that was nearby, and it was on a pig farm. So I've worked there for almost a year. Now I've kind of been around, and I've worked some hard jobs. And what I would say to that is, man, this could have drastic effects on the supply chain. This could have major, major impact in workplaces that maybe shouldn't have to or be under this. I'll give you an example. I worked at a food manufacturing plant. Okay. And they were so desperate for workers sometimes, because what happens in food manufacturing, boom, you get an order. Now it's time sensitive because they need to get it out and they need people. And they would go along the line. They would ask everyone in the factory if they were willing to work overtime. This was common. And then they would call people at home and say, look, can you come in? Are you willing? Now, if so long as they're just calling and saying, okay, no problem, and there's no repercussion for that, there's no problem with doing that. Now, when I hear about adding mental health as a specific element of occupational health, I worry that, well, this job sucks. I don't like doing manual labor, and you need to make me feel better about it. It's like, yeah, some jobs do suck. I worked at a job where all I did was put food product in a box and then palletize it. And that was every day, 12-hour shifts. I was doing that. It sucked. It was mentally anguishing. Like, you can't, I'm not crazy enough or intelligent enough to hold a conversation with myself for 12 hours a day on end. And so, again, the worry here is if we're talking about moving forward from a business perspective and getting our economy booming, this is the type of stuff that, in my opinion, can really hamper that, because I don't know that the Liberals really could strike a balance, or any government could. And if it's going to be at the whim of kind of the workers and what they would complain about for mental health, guess what? There's a lot of stuff to complain about at a lot of factories. Veterans wait list for mental health issues, PTSD, so far that I know, it's been 6 years and still nothing. I'm sorry to hear that, Deborah. Yeah, huge issue. My son has been on a wait list for behavioral therapy for almost 5 years. I'll pop this in. Thanks, Trina. For almost 5 years, something isn't working as far as getting people the mental health services. And I agree. So this is what I mean. We were talking about this earlier is, they talk about expanding some services, but what services are they expanding? Are they actually accessible to people? Are they really what's needed? And why generic? I mean, to me, platforms for any party should be specific. And when I hear generic political talk, it's frustrating. And we'll just leave it at that. But we'll continue on here. And they say they want to the Liberal Party wants to fully fund a national 3-digit mental health crisis and suicide prevention hotline. No problem with that. I don't think it's a bad idea. Again, I would prefer, to open that up to private and make the charitable status. There's a bunch of different things that you can maybe do. I don't know that it needs to be a government operated one, but I would say there's probably a need for that. This last year and a half has really exposed how hard life has been on a lot of people. A lot of people have lost jobs. A lot of people have lost homes. A lot of people have taken the alcohol and drugs to deal with things, and the mental health has definitely taken a massive hit. And we would be lying to ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that fact. All right. What do we got? Long-term healthcare, continuing on here. Improve the quality and availability of long-term care homes and beds. How? This is, again, a direct quote from the Liberal platform. Lots of this in there where you're just going, well, how would you plan on doing that? They said they will implement strict infection prevention and control measures, including through more provincial and territorial facility inspections for long-term care homes. Now, again, they're already supposed to be doing these long-term care inspections. I don't think they have enough people to do them, so they didn't talk about hiring more here, but they say they'll ensure that there's more inspections. The other flip side is you have the inspections, you need to have enforcement. If you don't have enforcement, I don't know that it's a lot of good to have the inspection, because what's the point? Is it just a virtue signal to say you did it? I'm somebody who wants results. I don't much care about perception. I just want results. And long-term care definitely needs to have higher standards, but a lot of that lies, again, in the fact that these employees, I didn't take this off, did I? A lot of these employees don't, there's not enough of them. They're overworked. They're struggling to get through the work they have. And you imagine you have intensive needs from patients, and you're understaffed. And you can imagine how that would wear on you day after day after day after day, where you're not able to provide the care that you feel you should be able to require to give people, rather. And that, I mean, it can't be stated enough. If you had even 6 or 8 people, imagine, that needed help eating, needed help bathing, right? Can you imagine? Now, that would be nice if they only had 8 to deal with. My next door neighbor is a PSW. She would laugh if I said that, because the reality is it's much, much more than that. So they touch on kind of some of the plan to get more PSWs into long-term care here in this plan. I believe we'll come across it later. We'll get on that. But continuing down here, they say they want to develop a safe long-term care act collaboratively, to ensure the seniors are guaranteed the care they deserve no matter where they live. Again, what does that look like in reality? Let's pull this up here. I didn't realize I didn't have it up. What does that look like in reality? The Liberal platform doesn't tell us. Now, this is where I said they kind of address it. Maybe you don't agree with the addressing or how they do it. They say they will raise wages for personal support workers, including a guaranteed minimum wage of at least $25 an hour, and train up to 50,000 new personal support workers. Now, they can mandate a raise for PSWs that are federally regulated of up to $25, but they just say for personal support workers. So there's a lot of private institutions that wouldn't apply to. At that point, I don't know that they would be leaving that system. But again, they say they want to train up to 50,000, up to. Listen to the political language, right? Up to. What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, it could be 1,000, but we might train up to 50, right? So I always have issues with the political wording on this stuff. It doesn't really say what that looks like. And 25 per hour, that's been one of the biggest arguments with PSWs, is like, if you're working and it's that demanding, and ultimately that important. It's a very important job, taking care of uh, people. And 25 an hour is a reasonable wage, but a lot of them are struggling at 17, 18, under 20 an hour doing these very intensive jobs, which is part of the reason why they believe they can't get enough people. So I think that argument can definitely be made. Now, they say they will protect public health. Where are we going? Protecting public health, provide up to $100 million for safe return to class fund for ventilation improvement projects across Canada, as well as $10 million for First Nations to improve air quality in on-reserve schools. Now, let's be blunt here. That sounds like a lot of money, and $100 million is nothing to scoff at. But if we're talking about actually making an impact on ventilation systems and ventilation improvements for schools across the nation, $10 million for Indigenous schools is nothing. That's like maybe 20 schools. Maybe you're talking probably $500,000 million for every school, depending on the size or more, at a low end, and provide $100 million across Canada to improve ventilation improvements projects across Canada for schools. Again, lots and lots of schools, and big schools and ventilation systems are not cheap. That's really a drop in the hat. So if that's a big issue for you, that you might say that's not enough money. All right, continuing on here. I will look through the comments after everyone. I'm sorry, I'm trying to read them and then plug them in, but it's too much. But provide $100 million to the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative. $70 million of this funding directed to a new pillar, they say, focused on air quality and indoor ventilation. So I'm unsure if they're talking about the $100 million that they already just talked about or a new $100 million. But I think it's the old $100 million, and then now they're saying, well, it's $70 million that would be allocated. They want to introduce a new tax credit for small businesses to make it easier for them to invest in better ventilation. Now, if that's an issue for you, you might think that's a great idea, but that's just really more money going out the door that needs to be in the system right now, especially right now with our debt being $1.1 trillion plus. No indication given on how tax credit will be used or how much it would be in the plan at all. Trina. Paid sick leave amendments to the Canada Labor Code to provide 10 days of paid sick leave for all federally regulated workers. Now, I have issue with this because, again, I'm not going to say whether I agree with 10 days sick leave or not. I really haven't given it much thought. But it's tough when you're talking 10 paid sick days. That's 2 weeks of work. But amendments to the Canada Labor Code to provide 10 days of paid sick leave. Why did this just come out now? Right? This is an example of politicians be politicians, right? We're not going to roll this out when we're in the midst of this crisis, right? We're not going to roll it out then. No. We're going to wait till an election's called, and then we'll talk about 10-day paid sick leave. Well, you had 18, 19 months where you're at now that you had the opportunity to introduce this and you decided not to. So this to me smacks of being political, and the fact that they introduce it in the platform now but not 19 months ago, because wouldn't this be a thing to have introduced like right away at 19 months? We could have made that, instead of locking everyone down, maybe you could have said, hey, we'll offer paid sick leave to anyone who gets sick, and if we want you to be cautious. So if you have any symptoms, and then label the symptoms here, this, that, the other, then we want you to stay home and use that paid sick leave instead. And they could have done that. That would have made a lot more sense. It would have been would have had a lot less impact on businesses and organizations than just the blanket shutdowns. But they didn't do that. They waited till now. But here we go, continuing, helping teachers. Teachers often spend money out of pocket getting school supplies for the kids, additional items, so that they can offer, I guess you would say, better education and have more access to tools that are fun for the kids and informative educational. So the Liberals say they will increase the refundable tax credit to 25% from 15%, and expand eligible criteria to include tech devices and ensure that teaching supplies purchased to perform employment duties are eligible. Now, school nutrition and healthy eating, they want to develop a national food policy and work towards a national school nutritious meal program with $1 billion investment over 5 years. Now, again, I don't necessarily think this is a bad idea, but it's how do you pay for it? And is that even really enough? $1 billion over 5 years, if it's in every school, I'd have to look at a cost breakdown of what that actually looks like. But a lot of kids, I'll be blunt, they go to school hungry. I was one of them sometimes, and we had a program like that at our school. I don't know who ran it or where the money came from, but I used that program growing up, and it made an impact on me. I was able to go in and not feel bad about it, hang out with friends, and then eat some good stuff that was good. Got me in a frame of mind to actually learn. Um, and like so you go in, you have fruit, whatever, different things. There's a lot of kids that was their only meal of the day. There's a lot of kids that didn't have anything, and so maybe you could say develop a national school policy. That could be a good idea. Again, I would personally prefer to see the private industry step up, offer charitable status, the government to promote the heck out of this. Um, I don't know, find businesses to make it appealing to them to, have a offshoot of their business as a grocery store, as an example, rather than throw out the imperfect foods, right? We talk about circular economies all the time. I don't know if you know this, but a large amount of produce and food gets thrown away because it just doesn't look good. It's not that it's bad. It's not that it's any less delicious or not as nutritious. It's just that it doesn't look good enough to be sold in a grocery store. And so instead of sending to the grocery store, it goes to, a lot of times, landfills, are to farmers to feed if they can't find a place for it. Though I do know, I've spoken with farmers where it gets dumped. So if you could find ways to take that out of the system and bring it into a school food program to reduce waste, that could be a great way to go. Then give like a government seal on a program that says, hey, we have a circular food chain, and we give to, it means that we give to charities that provide school nutrition programs. Like, it could be something like that. The government always wants to be the solution. I actually believe personally government kind of sucks at everything they do. And so it's best to not have the government involved in every facet of life, but try to find ways to bring solutions to these real and prevalent issues, but in a way that's not always reliant on the government. My worry is that he talks a good talk on the platforms, but the action taken afterwards seems to always be lacking. Well, that is politicians 101, Trina. It's politicians 101. There's a lot of decent things that get talked about in all platforms. And I talked about this in the conservative platform. I said, like, the RCMP thing, if you're coming from a safe country, you should not be allowed to seek asylum in Canada. That is common sense. Hiring, they talked about guns, having more RCMP officers in the GTA, and they know that guns are coming from the United States. Yes, again, that makes sense, but will they do it? And it's kind of the MO of politicians. They talk a lot of the good talk, but I would be curious if somebody wanted to do a breakdown of like the last couple of governments on all the major platform promises they had and how many actually came to fruition. I would imagine less than 20% of everything promised in the platform actually ends up coming to fruition. Continuing on here, back down the platform trail. So we had school helping teachers, nutrition programs. Now, restrictions on food beverage marketing. Food and beverage marketing to children. Liberals want to introduce new restrictions on the commercial marketing of food and beverages to children and establish new front of package labeling to promote healthy food choices. Now, again, the government's going to decide what's a healthy food choice. I worry about lobbying being involved in those decisions and things that maybe aren't actually healthy food choices being promoted as healthy. It's always kind of ugly to me when the government gets involved in these decisions, but not necessarily a bad idea. I just don't think it could be rolled out practically, truthfully. What would this new front of a package labeling to promote healthy food choices look like, right? We don't get to know. The Liberals like to, it sounds good, but like most political parties, they don't tell us how this will actually work in practicality. Now, this is a big issue for people. This is a big election issue. Let's go housing. Liberals want to introduce a new rent-to-own program. Now, to help make it easier, they say, to help make it easier for renters to get on the path towards home ownership while renting. They want to create a stream for current renters and landlords, particularly those in condo settings, to immediately enter into a rent-to-own agreement. Now, part of the issue is that rent-to-own agreements, you end up paying high rent. Okay, you pay extra rent so that you can offset it. The other thing is, if housing prices continue to go up, you could end up where your down payment's still not enough. You owe even more at the end of the down payment, and you've just paid a couple of years of expensive rent and really have nothing to show for it. The government wants to get involved in rent to own. Again, I don't think this is the place for the government to get involved. I don't think they should be involved in these type of decisions. But this is their solution. They want to introduce a rent-to-own program, and then they say for current renters, landlords, particularly those in condo settings, to immediately enter into rent-to-own agreements. Continuing on, they want to implement a new tax-free first home savings account. They say we will introduce a tax-free first home savings account that will allow Canadians under 40 to save up to $40,000 towards their first home and to withdraw it tax-free towards their first home purchase. So the tax-free savings account used to be $10,000, I think, under Harper, got eliminated down to $5,000 under Trudeau. And I find it kind of humorous that he brings this back in a sense that, well, hey, we'll give you $40,000 tax-free if it goes towards your first home. Now, the flip side of this is homes are extremely expensive, and 40 grand might not even be enough for a down payment in some markets. So, for instance, you might pay 50 to 100 grand, and a lot of these GTA markets, Vancouver is getting bad like that too. And the government's saying up to 40. It's like, well, if it's your money and you've already paid tax on it and you're setting it aside for a purchase, why not 100,000? Why not 200,000? Whatever it is, as long as it goes towards the designated thing, which you said was the home purchase. But they don't do that. Up to 40,000. Is it enough? Don't know. Continuing on, double the first-time home buyer's tax credit from 5 to 10. This will put $1,500 in your pocket to make a home purchase a little bit easier, they say. Again, tax credit end of the year would help a little bit. Again, a lot of the issue on the housing is supply and demand, and it's not being talked about. A lot more demand for housing than there is supply, and if renters, I mean, even on the rental market, we'll give it as an example, not enough apartment buildings, condo buildings, etc. And a lot of that comes down to, we get down to the nitty gritty, is zoning restrictions, is you can't build high in certain areas, etc., etc. Now, I go the flip side. I say if it's safe, you should be able, and you own the land, you should be able to basically do as high as you want, but they don't want to do that. But it is what the cities need. You would, ideally, I'll give you an example. In my own city of Kitchener here, there was a high rise. I used to do deliveries for electrical equipment to construction sites. And these guys, I said, man, like, you guys are doing kind of a high rise, but why wouldn't you go higher? They said, we can't. It's zoned out. They were only able to go 5 floors high because of the zoning restrictions, because there is residential beside them. Now, the flip side of that is, if you buy that land, and for instance, you, instead of 5 floors, you can go up to 50, right? Now there's way more rental properties in that area. But not only that, it's more beneficial for the renters, because if we can get more supply in, if there's 50 units, they don't have to charge as much to get their money back out of the building. If that makes sense, there's more money coming into them, so they don't have to get exorbitant rent prices to get it back. Now, supply and demand, like if the market is high, they're still going to charge high, but the more you would get this kind of thing happening, the lower the prices would slowly come down, as there's more supply than there is demand. So, conversation that gets missed by, my opinion, both liberals and conservatives on that topic. Continuing down the list, reduce monthly mortgage costs. Liberals say they will reduce the price charged by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation on mortgage insurance by 25%. They say for a typical home buyer, this will save them $6,100. Don't know much about it. I currently rent, so maybe people are more familiar with this than I am. Increase the insured mortgage cutoff from $1 million to $1.25 million, and indexes to inflation to better reflect today's home prices. Now, that line should be a wake-up call for people. Increase the insured mortgage cutoff from $1 million to $1.25, meaning a lot of people are in homes now, like average people, worth more than $1 million, and they want to even index it to inflation to better reflect today's home prices. So that's kind of crazy, to index it to inflation, meaning they are expecting kind of still, to me, it to creep up. Continuing on, help cities accelerate housing construction. The use it or lose it principle. Let's pull that article up here. Give me a second. Pull it up. So Trudeau talked about this. We covered it. It kind of a bit over the top, in my opinion. Well, not a bit over the top. Kind of a lot of bit over the top. Now, here's the issue here coming down. Let's pull it up. Sorry, everyone. All right, we got it. Trudeau's use it or lose it housing plan. So 13 days before the election, Trudeau decided to release his housing platform, release his platform. The man said he admires China's basic dictatorship, and how does he plan on solving Canada's housing crisis? Well, he wants to apply the use it or lose it principle to underused and vacant properties to build more homes. The Liberal plan was titled A Home for Everyone. It says that a key barrier which slows down the pace of new home building stems from complex backlog and under-resourced municipal zoning and permitting. So how do the Liberals propose to grow annual housing? The Liberals say they will offer an application-based fund that will offer support to municipalities that grow housing faster than their historical average, reduce approval times, and help establish inclusionary zoning bylaws. I'm not sure what inclusionary zoning bylaws are, and encourage transit-oriented development. So if you're ahead of historical pace, they say they want to basically reward these municipalities through an application-based fund. Again, the government picking winners and losers again. But I digress. The Liberal plan says that cities and communities that build more homes faster will be rewarded through this fund. Trudeau's housing plan says that the funding to the municipalities will be flexible. Some municipalities need funds for for capacity, i.e. surge of planners, some for offsets for land purchases, others for underlying infrastructures, some to offset policies like inclusionary zoning. So I don't like the term use it or lose it. I'm a big proponent of property rights, just FYI. But Justin Trudeau's housing plan says that the Liberals will work with municipalities within this program to identify vacant or underused property that should be converted to housing on the principle of use it or lose it. So this language implies that the government will have the final say in whether or not you can keep your vacant or underused property. Now, again, what does underused property mean? Like, if you had a second home, are we talking second home? Probably not. But like, again, this vague political language always concerns me because it's like Pandora's box. You just foot's in the door if people kind of agree to it, and they can just expand. And then it's like, whoa, that's not at all what we thought it was. It's like, yeah. And so I always worry when this kind of language is vague and they say, use it or lose it. And they want to work with municipalities within the program to identify vacant or underused property that should be converted to housing on the principle of use it or lose it. Now, there could be an argument to say that maybe there's some people holding out land to drive up property costs in the area, and this needs to be addressed. Well, I think you could address it without taking it. even if you offer a fair market price, right, on vacant or underused land, and you paid the people, it is not the government's position to say, hey, Greg, I'm taking your land because you don't use it enough. It's just not how this works here in Canada. At least it's not how it should work. So when they say this, that's fine, but that's their proposal. I would say that maybe the proposal is if that's the issue, is that there's vacant and underused land. We want it to be used for property. Well, that's great. And I can actually agree with that point, but I would sure as hell not say that I'm going to take it if the person doesn't want to sell it. What you could do is you could say, hey, if land sits vacant, after, X amount of time, your land taxes are incrementally going to go up and up and up and up. And so maybe it's not profitable for you to do so, or to sit on that land. But when we get into the underused land too, that makes me think, like, what are you defining as underused? That's such a broad term. And now the government's going to get to decide, based on this wording, if they implement this, what they do with vacant and underused land in the name of good things, right? The government never promises bad things. They always promise great things. But like all our responsibility as Canadians is to look at these things and say, well, what could that lead to? And when the government decides whose land they can expropriate for the purposes of good things based on titles like vacant or underused, that should concern everyone. So again, Liberal platform talks about that. I think it's something every Canadian should know about before they cast a vote. I'm not going to tell you how to vote. Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, People's Party, Independent, you vote your values. I won't endorse any of them. I'm merely doing my best to try to cover politics. That's it. But we'll continue on here and pull up the other screen. Sorry, everyone's still getting used to this. So that's the use it or lose it principle that they introduce. Now they say they want to build and revitalize more affordable housing. They quote here from the platform as permanently increase funding to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund by a total of $2.7 billion over 4 years, dedicated to helping affordable housing providers acquire land and buildings to build and preserve more units, extending the model of cooperative housing to new communities, accelerating critical repairs. All right, so on that, I mean, lots of money, billions upon billions of dollars has been used up in all these different housing commitments, right? And I would say that it's not been effective. Now, the reality is if you're spending billions of dollars and you're getting 10, maybe 20,000 units over 5 years, but you have an influx of people coming to that area and there's already more people needing units than there is units, and you're influxing people in through immigration in numbers that concentrate, I think 40% was the number in the GTA, then that leads to more shortages, and you're not going to be able to catch up by government injecting money. You need to have a private solution. You need to have these corporations, again, be building units like it's going out of style. So I think, again, that stems from municipal zoning laws, being able to build vertical in the cities instead of like condos being more profitable. Like, here's another one. You could actually, if we want more apartments to get more building or more rental units, you could say we're going to charge you more on, I don't know, we could charge you more on condos and single unit housing to build them in the short term, maybe on a moratorium or something like this, and we'll charge you less on apartment buildings, triplexes, or certain types of buildings that house more per square footage. Because again, the biggest issue to me facing on the rental thing is when we have way more demand than there is supply, it causes the price of everything to go up. That's the natural market thing. That's not greed. Like if you're able to charge $2,000 because nobody has units, you're going to charge $2,000. If the market all of a sudden, there's way more and people can go get better supply somewhere else, your price, guess what? You can charge $4,000, $5,000. It doesn't matter. You still beholden to that market. So when more supply comes in, you're not going to be able to charge those exorbitant prices unless you're offering something exorbitantly different that looks way better. So these are the things that really need to be considered. Bam, bam. All right. Continuing on. Let's get back into the platform. Where are we at for time? Okay. Wow, man. Liberal platform is dense with a lot of hands out. So here's another one. Convert empty office space into housing. Retail and office space has changed due to COVID-19. Some commercial property owners, particularly in major urban cores, are facing rise in vacancies. This is an opportunity for property owners and communities to explore converting excess space into rental housing. Again, government getting more involved here in housing, different things. Want to convert empty office space into housing. Again, might not be a bad idea. If these office buildings are going to sit empty, they're already going to have some plumbing and things like that set up. But who knows if it would be a case-to-case scenario, whether the retrofitting would be worth doing, or unfortunately, sometimes it's more, cheaper to just demolish it and start new. They say they want to double the existing 2021 commitment to $600 million. And work with municipalities to create a fast-track system for permits to allow faster conversion of existing buildings. All right, multi-generation. We'll skip some of the boutique stuff here because I'm a little over the time I wanted. Protecting your rights. Home buyers. The Liberal Party wants to create a home buyers bill of rights. They want to ban blind bidding on houses. Now, this is a bit of an issue. Ban blind bidding, meaning if you haven't gone and seen the unit, you shouldn't be able to bid on it. Now, I can agree with that, but we're also kind of in the virtual age right now in the midst of things. So would that include virtual home visits? Because I get what they're trying to do here. I don't necessarily disagree with it. But again, it's kind of how they arrive at the solution. Establish a legal right to home inspection. I thought that was an interesting one. And they say they want to ensure total transparency on the history of recent house sale prices on title searches. That actually makes sense. These are basic things that can be done to help consumers at least make a more informed decision. So I don't have issue with that. Here's another one. Require real estate agents to disclose when they're involved in both sides of a potential sale to all participants in a transaction. Yes. There shouldn't even be a discussion on that. Shouldn't even be any debate. Yeah, I mean, if you're working both sides of the sale, some would say that's a conflict of interest, and maybe that needs to be disclosed. Maybe? No, 100% needs to be disclosed. Moving on, continuing down. What do we got? Move forward with a publicly accessible beneficial ownership registry. Ensure banks and lenders offer mortgage deferrals for up to 6 months in the event of job loss or other major life event. Again, if they do that, the banks are going to find ways to make that money back. So you're going to probably be paying, everybody's probably going to have to pay higher fees as a result of them offsetting that potential costs to themselves. That's just the reality. That's the way banks work. It's the way business works. They're not going to take a loss if they don't have to take a loss. Continuing, stop rent evictions by deterring unfair rent increases that fall outside of a normal change in rent. Require landlords to disclose on their tax filing the rent they receive pre and post renovation and implement a proportional surtax if the increase in rent is excessive. Now, here's the issue here. Same thing. Who decides what's excessive? What is deemed excessive? Will it be a concrete number or subject to change based on opinion? I get that rent evictions is a huge issue. It's actually hitting me personally in my building here. In my building here, they've been systematically picking off 1 or 2 people a year and basically saying, here's your letter, get out, we're going to renovate and re-rent. Because like myself, I got into this unit before it got super expensive, and it's way more expensive to leave anywhere else in this city. And so I'm kind of stuck. So what they've been doing is they've been systematically kind of removing people. I don't think they're dropping a ton of money in renovations, truthfully. It's like new laminate, maybe carpet, stuff that is basic stuff that usually gets done, maybe $3,000-4,000, and then they're jumping the rent, from, well, just for argument's sake, I don't know what everybody in here pays, but let's say it's $1,000. They're jumping. I think we're now at like $1,400 a month for a 2-bedroom in my place. So, is that deemed excessive, or is 200, 300? Like, what's deemed excessive? So, anytime there's this vague political language, you need to be cautious on that. And then that's government gets to decide again, whether or not you made too much money. It's just another tool for them to beat you over the head with a new tax. So again, I understand what they're trying to do to stop rent evictions. I actually think it is an issue. But the question is, how they go about that, how they arrive at the solution, and then who gets punished in the process. Anytime there's an action by the government, there's a cause and effect. And who is it going to affect? How does that actually lay out and look? Continuing on. Curb speculation on house flipping. Establish an anti-flipping tax on residential properties, requiring properties to be held for at least 12 months. Canadians who encounter changes in life circumstances due to, for example, pregnancy, death, new jobs, divorce, or disability will be exempt from this policy. So, people buy houses up, fix them up, and flip them. They want to stop that. I really don't necessarily, I don't know how I feel on that. Don't know enough about house flipping and how it affects the market to really make an informed decision. So I'm not going to really delve into it too much. Crackdown on foreign ownership, but just for 2 years. They want to ban foreign money from purchasing a non-recreational residential property in Canada for the next 2 years, unless this purchase is confirmed to be for future employment or immigration in the next 2 years. So again, I actually think this is definitely something that needs to be done. Crack down on foreign ownership. We have a lot of foreign ownership, specifically in Toronto and Vancouver. 2 of the big cities hit on that. But 2 years is not enough. And it just seems like they wanted to put it in the platform, but don't really want to do much with it. What do we got? Stop excessive prices in the financialization of housing. Now, this is like the type of wording that should concern Canadians when the government starts talking like this. Stop excessive profits in the financialization of housing. Large corporate owners of residential properties, such as real estate investment trusts, REITs, are amassing increasingly large portfolios of Canadian rental housing, making your rent more expensive. And this could be true too, but it also, well, then you need to have a diverse market and have a competitive market, which means you need to allow for the system that allows that to happen. So again, I argued that supply and demand is more of an effect on this. Now, there is something to be said if these large REITs get too much of the market, they can up the market artificially. That's why you need to have competitive, markets. That's why house flipping might not make sense. That's why different things, you need to actually have more people in the market wanting to build housing. And so here's another thing they want to put in place policies to curb excessive profits in this area while protecting small independent landlords. Again, like, what's excessive profits in their mind? Who gets to decide that? Why does the government get to decide that? I would prefer we have the system set up where the market is competitive. And as a result, guess what? If you have crappy units and there's enough supply out there, they don't get the profit anymore. And eventually the market would either bring the price down or the quality would increase. So great book on this actually is touched on by Thomas Sowell, Harvard educated economist. Basic economics. He touches on a lot of these misconceptions, and housing was one of the big ones where I learned a lot from him on the supply and demand side of things, and how well-meaning politicians will put in things like rent caps, but all it does is ensure that, like, there's really no motivation to actually fix things on the behalf of the landlord. Because if I can't make any more, then why would I continue investing in it? And there's not enough supply and there's still that demand, I'm going to make X amount anyway. So the deterioration of things, different things. It's a great book. It'll give you a great background in a lot of basic economics things. Now continue. What do we want? Increase the power of federal. Yes. Federal government, or the liberal government, will increase the power of federal regulators to respond to housing price fluctuations, ensure a more stable housing market. Well, how would you increase the power of federal regulators? How would these regulators respond to housing price fluctuations? Wouldn't this entail giving the government more power to tinker in the housing market? And no real address to what that looks like again. So again, always be concerned with vague, generic political language, especially because Pandora's box, foot in the door, as the metaphor is, like, it's, if they can get it, the foot in the door, and they will expand it. That is government's natural desires to expand. It's just like governments, if they start small, they always get bigger. They don't go the other way usually. $10 a day childcare, we're familiar with that. Build 250,000 new high quality childcare spaces, hire 40,000 more childhood educators. Again, they can say all these things. How do you actually do that? No indication. I could be like, I'm going to create 40 million jobs. There's 38 million Canadians. Be like, it doesn't mean anything. How do you get there? So it really, again, vague, generic political language. Giving new parents a break on student loans. They want to let new parents pause repayment of their federal student loans until their youngest child reaches the age of 5. This would also include parents who have graduated but still have not finished paying off their loans. Support for seniors. Boost the OAS by 10%. Next year for seniors 75 and over. Increase the GIS for $500 for single seniors, $750 for couples starting at age 65. Increase the CPP survivors benefit by 25%. We already introduced a 1-800 helpline for seniors to provide a single point of access to a wide range of government services and benefits. Not necessarily a bad idea to have a helpline for people looking to access things. You need to make sure people can access the things that are already provided. But again, how does that actually look? The government's generally terrible at implementing these things. So I digress. Eliminate interest on federal loans. Permanently eliminate the federal interest on Canada student loans and Canada apprentice loans. Again, I'm not going to disagree. Make, interest on student loans. I think maybe you leave, you can promote things through government disincentive too. For instance, if you're going into into college or university for something there's literally no jobs for, well, congratulations. Maybe you keep the interest on your loan, right? And if you're going into a trade or a really in need position, hey, we'll waive your interest. So there's things they can do. They're not talking about that though. They're just talking about all Canada student loans and Canada apprentice loans. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea to get rid of interest on loans, at least on specific ones. Increase the repayment assistance threshold to $50,000 for Canada student loan borrowers who are single. And now they say recovery just can't be about getting things back to the way they were before. It should be about making things better. It should be about making work fair so that no one working full-time in Canada earns a wage that isn't livable, right? Restored employment to pre-pandemic levels, going beyond 1 million jobs. This all sounds good. How will they do it? They have no idea. There's no proposal in the actual platform a lot of that in the conservative and liberal platforms of just these vague, we'll do this. And it's like, okay, well, how? And I get that most people aren't interested in the how, but for the people that are, it should be available. Continue to expand Canada's worker benefit to support about 1 million additional Canadians' low-income jobs. EI introduced a new EI benefit for self-employed Canadians delivered through the tax system. So a new EI benefit for self-employed Canadians. Now, all this means is that if you're self-employed, you're now going to have to pay an EI premium to be self-employed probably in case you need to access the money from the system. So this is just going to be another thing that's tacked on to Canadians to pay as part of their experience of trying to create and benefit society through a business. They say that they would provide unemployment assistance comparable to EI lasting for 26 weeks. And what do we got? Self-employed Canadians seeking to access this benefit would be responsible to contribute the portion they would normally pay if they were a salaried employee. So there you go. You're going to have to pay what the equivalent would be if you were a salaried employee at that cost. Strengthen rights for workers employed by digital platforms so that they are entitled to job protections under the Canada Labour Code, and establish new provisions in the Income Tax Act to ensure that this work counts towards EI and CPP. Again, that should count in the sense that if you have a verifiable business, right? Strengthen rights for digital platforms, things like this. If you're running an online business and that's your job, I can understand the argument to actually include that towards EI and CPP, but at the same time, you need to be paying into those things. So if you're not making enough to pay into it, you see the balancing act that goes on. It's not necessarily, well, it's not easy for anybody to make these decisions, but not really well thought through on a lot of these, in my opinion. Bring forward a vision for a new and modern EI system that covers all workers. Okay, we'll get off the EI. Provide up to, no, continue. What do we got? Let's try to skip down here. Supporting Canada's small businesses. Give microgrants of $2,400 to small Main Street businesses to digitize their offerings, and offer zero interest loans to small and medium-sized businesses so they can finance larger technology adoption projects. Right. So a lot of stuff's being offered online right now. To digitize the offerings, it kind of makes sense. I'm not sure that the government needs to be giving out microgrants for these things, but I mean, they just made life really hard on businesses, so lots of businesses would see that as a great thing. I see it as something leading to more debt, which leads to more inflation, which hurts all Canadians. But there it is. This is the proposal. There's a problem. That's their solution. Improve the Canada Small Business Financing Program. Increase the annual financing by an estimated $560 million, supporting approximately, they say, 2,900 additional small businesses. This works out to approximately $193,000 per small business financed. So do with that what you will. It's a lot of money and not a lot of businesses being helped, in my opinion. Boosting business investment. Allow privately owned Canadian controlled businesses to immediately expense up to $1.5 million of growth enhancing investments, including in areas like software, patents, and machinery. I disagree with this. Basically, as a business, you can offset costs sometimes when you invest in certain things. If you're investing in things that are going to increase your productivity, things like that, a lot of times businesses will do it on their own. But a lot of times it's inhibitant because you can only write off so much. But maybe you can get more back on software, patents, and machinery. So things that would upgrade your factory if you get up to expense up to $1.5 million of growth enhancing investment. So if you're going to expand, there's a little bit more money back in your pocket. That's not necessarily a bad idea. Canada's digital charter. Look up the Canada Digital Charter. I'm not going to touch on that one. They want to move forward on legislation that will implement the digital charter. One of the things that they say in there is they want to keep online free from hate. Now, again, you kind of know the free speech stuff that was going on before the election that was being introduced that got shot down. This should concern Canadians when they say things like that and what they actually mean about that and how they're going to implement it. Continuing on. They want to, and this was directly in the platform, I thought it was interesting again, establish a Canada Advanced Research Projects Agency, CARPA, modeled on the Defense Advanced Research Projects, DARPA, in the United States, which has helped pioneer the development, they say, of several iconic technologies, including GPS mapping. The agency would be established with an initial endowment of $2 billion. So they kind of want something similar to DARPA in the United States, they want to implement here in Canada. Here's another one. Launch a new arts and culture recovery program that will match ticket sales for performing arts, live theaters, and other cultural venues to compensate for reduced capacity. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. I mean, you need to make the conditions better. We're not an endless welfare state. We can't do this and save everyone. I think this is a big issue here in Canadian politics. It's like sometimes it's like I feel like politics is really like almost like being a parent where you have to be like, sorry, I know it's a problem. I know how you feel about it, but can't do it. And there's things like that, like a lot of the policies that have come out of this government have hurt these businesses, especially tourism based. And then they're like, well, hey, well, the solution is we'll get more involved and we'll hand out more money. It's like, what money? $427 million in deficit spending every day, meaning more money going out, 427 million than we actually have. It's got to stop. And we'll just be honest about it. And you can't save everyone. And I get that, there's reduced capacity because people aren't going out to these things as much. It's going to happen. Extend COVID-related insurance coverage for media production stoppages. Implement a COVID-19 transitional program to provide emergency relief to out-of-work artists, craftspeople, creators, and authors who are primarily self-employed or independent contractors. Again, like, who gets picked on that? You can't save everyone. And we're broke. This is the thing I got missed in the debate. We're broke. There's no more money. We're way over our GDP right now for spending, and we can't promise more programs. Like, we got to reel in the spending here. And ideally, you do it in ways that don't hurt people as much as possible, and you try to get your biggest bang for your buck. But they're not talking about that. They keep talking about more. Support Canadian feature films by increasing funding to Telefilm Canada by $50 million. Provide Indigenous Screen Office with $13 million. This guy called this grab bag goodies. Launch a new cultural diplomacy strategy with an annual budget of $20 million per year to leverage the work done by our artists and cultural industries. Forge an international coalition to work on UNESCO Convention on the University of Cultural Content Online. Invest $43 million per year to support Canadian authors and books publishers by increasing by 50% funding through the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Council for Arts, and the Public Lending Right Program. Like, again, grab bag, money. Introduce legislation within 100 days that would require digital platforms that generate revenues from the publication of news content to share a portion of their revenues with Canadian news outlets. This legislation will be based on the Australian models. Think about this. If you're a digital platform and you generate revenues from the publication of news content, meaning you share news from around the world, you're sourcing it, you're putting up excerpts and then driving traffic into these sites. Like, if somebody's sharing my stuff, okay, and they're making money off it, I don't care so long as they source back to my work. So long as I get credit, they're driving traffic into my site. It's exposure I would have not otherwise gotten. Now, the Liberal government says they want to introduce legislation that would require these digital platforms that generate revenue from publication of news content to share that revenue, share a portion of their revenues with Canadian news outlets. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I think that's going to make people hesitant to share things. But on the plus side, maybe they'll share stuff like mine and maybe not worry about being called out on it. I don't know. Continuing on here. Let's pull it up. They say they want to modernize CBC radio, increase the production of national and local news, provide $400 million over 4 years to CBC Radio Canada so that it is less reliant on private advertising, with a goal of eliminating advertising during news and other public affairs shows. You heard that right. Liberal government wants to give even more money to the CBC because, they're too dependent on private advertising, meaning people aren't advertising with them because maybe their numbers suck. Maybe it's not the best money they could spend on advertising, so they've gone elsewhere. Well, the government says, don't worry about it. Keep on not doing a great job, and we'll keep subsidizing you on doing that not great job. Because what's supposed to happen in business, and by the way, I'm not picking on the CBC, and I'm not even really saying they're doing a bad job. We'll just leave that at that. What's supposed to happen is if something's not working as a business, you adjust and make it better for the market so that you can be profitable. What happens right now, in my opinion, if we're just going to keep subsidizing failure, well, you're being subsidized to continue to be bad. Why would you turn around and then go, well, I'm going to be better now and we're going to solve this problem? Well, if the government keeps handing out a lifeline, there really isn't that push to do the things that are required to become profitable. So something to think about there. All right, we got a few more and we'll close up. This is clearly a little bit longer than the conservative one, trying to get through as much as I can. I haven't even read off all the things I have posted here, but what do we got? All right, get woke, and we'll go there. All right, so it's a Liberal Party platform, so of course there's going to be some things that, you know, virtue signal a little bit. Anyways, let's get to it. Adapt and apply the Canada Business Corporations Act diversity requirements to federally regulated financial institutions, applying an intersectional lens to ensure diversity among senior ranks of the financial sector. Now, we can talk about opportunities all day, and I definitely want everybody to have equal opportunities. But when we start, you know, you go by quota and not by necessarily who's the best person for the job. That's where the issue lies. Move forward with our commitment to require Crown corporations to implement gender and diversity reporting beginning next year. So Crown corporations would be required to implement gender and diversity reporting. Okay. Continuing on, commit $200 million to a new Black-led philanthropic endowment fund. They say they will swiftly implement the Black-led philanthropic endowment fund. This fund will be administered independently by Black Canadians and will help support Black-led and Black-serving community organizations. Strengthen equity targets for federally funded scientific research through the granting councils to include a scientific target for the representation of Black Canadians. Provide funding of $30 million over 5 years to help promising graduate students, support the mentorship and development of younger researchers, and increase opportunities for Black Canadians in Canadian post-secondary institutions. Support the production of news in underserved communities with $50 million over 5 years through the Local Journalism Initiative. Develop a new $50 million Changing Narratives Fund to empower diverse communities, including BIPOC journalists and creatives. Free menstrual products. Provide free tampons and pads in federally regulated workplaces. This again, like another grab bag goodie. Definitely should be a tax-free item. I think they already took the tax off, so I might be mistaken on that. Create a $25 million menstrual equity fund for women's shelters, not-for-profit charities, community-based organizations, and youth-led organizations to make menstrual products available to vulnerable people. Eliminate the fee for permanent residents. This is one I agree with. I know people have gone through it. Make the application process free for permanent residents who have fulfilled the requirements needed to obtain it. So you're already a permanent resident, and then every 5 years, you're required to, like, I think, refile. And that's just money out the pocket. I remember talking about this with a guy I worked with. LGBTQ2, provide $40 million over 4 years in 2021, 2022 for capacity funding to Canadian LGBTQ2 service organizations. And they say ensure the cost of vitro fertilization becomes an eligible health expenditure under the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. Disability benefit, reintroduce a Disability Benefit Act, which will create a direct monthly payment, the Canada Disability Benefit, for low-income Canadians with disabilities ages 18 to 64. Continue to put a rising price on solution. Suck a lemon. And move forward in collaboration with the key trading partners like the United States, European Union, or applying border carbon adjustments to imports from countries that aren't doing their part to reduce carbon pollution and fight climate change. Now, talk about, you know, carbon, not necessarily the biggest issue. I don't believe in catastrophic climate change. I believe in catastrophic things to our environment that are being done by business and that there's not enough regulation being enforced on. But let's back this up. Continue to put a rising price on pollution. They say pollution, but we're talking about carbon, which is really what? Gas, natural gas, things like this nature. Things that you heat your home with, drive to work with, things that are required to basically function in society on a general basis. It affects the cost of goods and groceries because most everything is shipped by truck. So all these things lead into higher costs. When we get into this, there is, like, again, I'm all for making sure environment's taken care of. But when we talk about this, you're making life more unaffordable for people like myself that are lower income, that need this to drive to work. They need this to heat their homes. And you're right. Who pays for all of this? It's a very good question. It's who's going to pay for all of it. When we put on the rising, when we talk about the carbon tax, though, this hurts low and middle income Canadians who need this. This isn't just like a luxury thing. I'm just going to go out and do donuts in the parking lot because I want to. Like, maybe like 18-year-olds do, but the vast majority of people, they drive their car because they have to go somewhere, and it's usually a place like work. And so you're just making life more unaffordable for Canadians when you push forward on this. Now, I want to touch on this because the commitment the Liberals have currently, I believe it's 150 a ton by 2030, and I can't remember. I think it was the UN who did the cost on this. It was 33.7 cents a liter in addition to where we're at now by 2030, just in carbon taxes. And keep in mind that we already pay about 24.7 cents a liter in Ontario, at least, plus GST on top of that, and now add in the carbon tax on top of it, wherever it's at now, probably 7-8 cents, and that's going to jump another 33 cents. So if gas is $1.40 now, and you think it's tough, imagine when it's $1.70, $1.80, and you still got to go to work, and your groceries are going to go up as a result. But you know what? Patsy's on the backsies on towards net zero, right? This is a huge miss. They're hurting Canadians. They should know better. And as Dan McTagg, an 18-year Liberal, says, and operates Canadians for Affordable Energy, it's a pipe dream. It's things that give the government more control and ultimately hurt Canadians. And I 100% am in line with that line of thinking. Oil and gas sector. Make the oil and gas sector reduce emissions at a pace and scale needed to achieve net zero by 2050. So we're going to slowly dial back our oil sands. Well, guess what? Oil is still going to be produced and needed all around the world. It's going to be produced way less ethically than it could be produced here. We should be producing all the oil we could possibly produce, sending it around the world ethically. And because it's still going to be, if we're talking about climate on a global scale, we're all connected, right? It's much better for us to produce the thing that's still going to get used than it is for a Venezuela or Saudi Arabia with less restrictions around the production than it is for us to produce it. By the way, we're also broke, so it would make a lot of sense to maximize pipelines and exports of oil, refineries, all these different things to help pay down the deficit. Well, oil is still high. The time for a pipeline was when you didn't need it, but better late than never. I'll continue here. Require oil and gas companies to reduce methane emissions by at least 75% below 2012 levels. Below 2012 levels by 2030. This is your liberal. Like, these things are going to decimate. Think of all the income that comes from Alberta. They're just going to decimate Alberta, Saskatchewan, the West. Not only that, it's going to hurt our bottom line because it's like shooting yourself in the foot. You're sitting on some of the biggest oil reserves in the entire world, and you're like, nope. And I'm going to leave that in the ground, and I'm going to make it more expensive for anyone who is doing it anyways. Like, we have better technology here than anywhere else that's producing it in the world, and they're very. There's always a cost to extracting anything from the earth. But as far as cost goes, I would rather that cost be done here in Canada because it's going to be done a lot better for the environment than it is going to be done in a country without those restrictions. The Liberal government says we don't care. We're going to shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to oil and gas and hope for the best. Fingers crossed. Nothing makes me angrier than this net zero nonsense talk. It's a freaking pipe dream it's a fantasy world pipe dream for politicians and elites that in general don't get affected by these policies because they're better off than most. They don't know what it's like when gas goes from, you're filling your gas tank once a week, and then all of a sudden it's $15, $20, $25 more to fill up, and now it's $100 out of your pocket, and it's like, shit, there's my spending money for the month gone. Yeah, that's what it's like being a low-income person. They're a little disconnected from that a lot of time, and to me, net zero, carbon taxes, slamming the oil and gas industry, all smacks of how disconnected they are from the reality of everyday Canadians. All right, let's pull it up again. I'll pull it up. We're closing out. We're almost done. Hang tight. Ban thermal and coal exports from and through Canada no later than 2030. Accelerate our G20 commitment to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies from 2025 to 2023. So in just 2 years, eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. And develop a plan to phase out public financing of the fossil fuel sector. Introduce a clean electricity standard. This one is concerning. That will set Canada on a path to cut more emissions by 2030 and to achieve 100% net zero emitting electricity system by 2035. Again, no thought into how this actually looks for everyday Canadians and how it affects the economy. And look at there's California with rolling blackouts. They didn't have, green energy has its limits, right? Green energy, I'll use it loosely because I know worked on windmills, and I'm not a big fan. Create a pan-Canadian grid council to promote infrastructure investments, smart grids, grid integration, and electrical sector innovation with the goal of making Canada the most reliable, cost-effective, and carbon-free electricity producer in the world. Good luck. It's a pipe dream. You know how many windmills you would have to cover so much of Canada in windmills, solar panels, even come close. Nuclear is a conversation that needs to be had, and natural gas is a big part of that too. No. We're going to go net zero into la land and hurt lots of Canadians because this is the virtue signaling we've done to say that this is how it gets done. Again, environment extremely important. Yes, you need to make the concrete things happen to protect the environment, to protect fresh water, to protect wildlife. But this is nonsense. This hurts everyday Canadians. It's nuts. Advance green industrial strategies and continue investing funds from the Net Zero Accelerator in strategic opportunities. Accelerate the development of the national net zero emissions model, building code by 2025. So net zero's emission model building code, not even sure what that looks like, but by 2025, they want that introduced into the system. So it's going to fundamentally change the way buildings are built. And I would imagine that net zero buildings are probably more expensive to build than non-net zero buildings, but I digress. Accelerate the transition from fossil fuel-based heating systems to electrification through incentives and standards, including investing $250 million to help low-income Canadians get off home heating oil. Providing grants of up to $5,000 for retrofits and interest-free loans of up to $40,000 for deep retrofits. Again, where's the money coming from? Invest in an additional $1.5 billion to the IZEV rebate program and broaden eligibility to a wider range of vehicle types, including used vehicles. Just terrible idea. You're going to offer government subsidy or loans or for used electric vehicles. Like the biggest. Find me an electric vehicle that is in good shape that's been on the road for 10 years. I'll wait. Because I've looked. I actually wanted to get an EV at one time. And basically, batteries have a lot of issues with them, especially in cold weather. After about 6-7 years, they don't hold quite the charge they used to hold. And so that's just a bad idea to subsidize that, in my opinion. Invest additional $700 million to add 50,000 new electric vehicle chargers and hydrogen stations. Or I'll give you my solution here. We need more charging stations for the green infrastructure, right? This is the one thing they press on quite a bit. My goodness, come over here. Well, the solution I would have is why don't we add a surtax on top of what electric vehicle sales are for, high-end luxury or electric vehicles, or just any electric vehicles. Let's let the early adopters of electric pay a surcharge, and then that can fund the infrastructure for everyone else to widely adopt it, because the people that are going to get an electric car right now at $40,000-$50,000 or $35,000, the low end like 32, 33, I think is where you can get in. There might be something lower now, but the people that are going to do that are probably going to do it anyway, and they don't need green subsidies and different things like this. And quite frankly, if it's so important to get this done, subsidize it through a surplus tax or something like that on electric vehicle sales. Hey, it's the charging infrastructure fund, whatever you want to call it. Wide adoption, make it sound politically great. I'm sure they would come up with a much better name than I could. Work with industry, labor, and other stakeholders to develop a regulated sales requirement that at least 50% of all new light-duty vehicle sales be zero-emission vehicles in 2030. What does this do to the market? What does this do to the cost of used vehicles? What does this do to the cost of parts? Mandating anything, like can they well, here's another one. If you mandate that at least 50% of all new light duty vehicle sales be zero emission vehicles in 2030, well, how does that work? Does that mean the cost on the 50% that are gas, if people don't want the electric, will they go through the roof? You start mandating things. That's not how markets work. It's a dangerous area. Exactly. Why not incentivize instead of taxing? Yeah, on the platform, less tends to be more. Yeah, I believe in incentivizing human behavior towards the right decisions. Again, agree or disagree that these things are pressing issues, but incentivize them instead of slapping people, with disincentive after disincentive after disincentive that gives the government more and more and ever expanding control over more and more sectors of Canadian life. Require 100% of medium vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles sales be zero emission by 2040 where feasible. Well, I don't know what they mean by where feasible. Again, vague political language. Invest $200 million to retrofit large trucks to cut down on pollution now. Not sure what they mean by retrofitting. I would assume dev fluid or whatever it's called for diesel. That might be the retrofit they're referring to, but they don't say that. Build an end-to-end sustainable battery supply chain. No indication given to how. I'm going to have to give a drink here, everyone. Sorry. Not an endorsement. Work to attract near-term billion-dollar anchor investments in areas like minerals, processing, and cell manufacturing. Again, no idea is given onto how. It's kind of a common theme, right? Require climate-related financial disclosures in the development of net zero plans for federally regulated institutions. It includes financial institutions, pension funds, government agencies. Issue green bonds annually worth a minimum of $5 billion. Work with financial experts through the Sustainable Finance Action Council to develop a net zero capital allocation strategy to move the capital into the types of investments needed to accelerate Canada's transition to a prosperous net zero future. Again, we know better. We know how to invest this money better than you do. Therefore, we're going to get this money and we'll redistribute it as we see fit. A lot of this in the Liberal platform especially. Committing to make a high-frequency rail a reality. They say they will move forward with the project in the Toronto to Quebec City corridor with stops in Pointe-Rivière, Peterborough, among others. Train 1,000 new community-based firefighters to ensure we are ready for future fire seasons. Okay, not necessarily a bad idea. I don't know if firefighters are understaffed though. I guess it would depend on the area. I'm not really familiar with the issue. Continue. Establish 10 new national parks, 10 new national marine conservation areas in the next 5 years. Continue to work with partners in Canada to ensure Canada meets its goals to conserve 25% of our lands and waters by 2025 and 30% of each by 2030. Working to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 in Canada and achieving a full recovery for nature by 2050. Well, what do we mean by nature loss? Are we talking cutting and different things like that? And what is a full nature recovery by 2050? Again, like these generic things that don't really explain what they are, where you'd have to go down the research hole and research these. And that, to me, that's always concerning, because if it's not clear to what you're actually talking about, but it sounds kind of nice, like most people don't look into it. But anytime it's vague language or I'm unfamiliar with it, I get concerned. I'll let you do with that what you will, but it's always good to actually know what's being advocated for. Acquiring the right to a healthy environment for the first time and recognize the right to a healthy environment for the first time in federal law. Again, not sure what that means. Not sure what that means. By spring 2022, move forward with mandatory labeling of chemicals in consumer products, including cosmetics, cleaning products, and flame retardants in upholstery that may have impacts on our health environment. Again, don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. I think that might be a decent idea. Again, but it depends on who's doing it, what the advocations are for, and like how severe we get on this. Like, do we hit some industries more than the others, or it's always concerning when the government's the controller of the conversation on these key issues. Require that all plastic packaging in Canada contains at least 50% recycled content by 2030. Introduce labeling rules that prohibit the use of chasing arrow symbols. This was one I really agreed with. I actually thought this was a great idea. Right? Shocking. I know. Something that I think Greg thinks something in the Liberal platform is a great idea. There you go. Introduce labeling laws that prohibit the use of chasing arrow symbols unless 80% of Canada's recycling facilities accept and have reliable end markets for these products. So basically, unless 4 out of 5 recycling centers can actually recycle your product and send it to a market somewhere, you can't put that it's recyclable anymore. That's what they want to introduce. I actually think that's a good idea. That just makes sense to me. Implement a right to repair to extend the life of home appliances, particularly electronics. This one, again, I agree with. This is just common sense, and it should have already been done. By requiring manufacturers to supply repair manuals and spare parts and facilitate the replication after the part is no longer produced. So, yeah, basically, a lot of issues with like used appliances is you can't get parts. And parts are stupid expensive when you can, because there's so few of them. so few of them actually doing it because nobody knows how to fix them. So having a manual, I mean, some people would fix it. I don't think that's going to be a high uptake, but it just like it's not that much to add a manual and be like, here it is if you want to fix it. And if somebody can fix it, keep the cycle longer. That's better for the environment. Makes sense to me. Now, here's another one. Create a no waste food fund to help build a circular food economy where no food is wasted from farm to table. Again, I know farmers personally, a lot of imperfect fruits, things that unfortunately go to waste. So I don't know how they would arrive at this solution, and I don't necessarily think they're the best to implement it. But if they want to facilitate the conversation and help players that are in part of that industry put it together, that would make sense. Now, the Liberals will implement UNDRIP just as well as the Conservatives. We talked about this the other day. The scariest part of the Conservative platform, it's in the Liberal platform as well. So I was doing a little bit of research into this, and the Conservatives they voted against Bill C-15, which is the implementation of UNDRIP into Canadian law. Then they turned around and put it in their platform. So I'm not sure why they flipped on it, but ultimately they did, and it's in their platform now. Now, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms says that UNDRIP is dangerous, divisive, and divisive, and they said that non-Aboriginal Canadians would be rightfully concerned that it could lead to the expropriation of their land to be in compliance with UNDRIP protocols and policies. So it's in the Liberal platform as well. Now, here's one I don't like. I'll explain why after. You may disagree with me. That's okay. Gun laws, red flag laws that would allow immediate removal of firearms if that person is a threat to themselves or others, particularly to their spouse or partner. Increase maximum penalties for firearms trafficking and smuggling from 10 to 14 years imprisonment. I have no problem on the increasing maximum penalties. But the red flag law, you have an ex-partner that decides they're angry at you, knows you have a weapon, and they can go to a court, give a sob story, and if they're granted, that permission, red flag law, boom, they get to confiscate your property on something that may not be true. And this is something that happens, not a lot, but it does happen in our system currently. So I don't like that red flag law where, again, that's kind of something that's a bit much. In my opinion, you always want to be concerned that if somebody is a threat to themselves or others, obviously we want to be able to do things about it, but there is concerns with a red flag law too. So something to keep in mind. Anti-racism strategy, they say they'll present a national plan on combating hate by 2022 as part of a renewed anti-racism strategy, and then will include recommendations from the anti-Semitism and Islamophobia summits and specific action on combating hate crimes in Canada, including amendments to the criminal code, training and tools for public safety agencies, and investments to support digital literacy and prevent radicalization to violence. Again, not really sure what that looks like, but it's there. Continuing down, foreign policy will end on that and make sure everyone pays their fair share. Sorry, everyone. I know this has been a long one. Liberal platform had like 80 separate parts in it. I want to make sure people know what's in it. I know this isn't the most exciting thing to do. I'll try to clip out some of the stuff that's more interesting after it. But it's a rough day for me. I'm like doing 5:30. I got to go somewhere for a scrutineer meeting. I'm going to be a scrutineer in the election. And so it's a busy day for me. So I'll do my best to get this stuff out as soon as I can. But foreign policy, the Liberal government wants to increase Canada's international development assistance every year towards 2030 to realize the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So under the Liberals, we will send more money to the United Nations to obtain the Sustainable Development Goals every year until 2030. Now, and they say they donate at least 200 million vaccines to developing countries through COVAX, continue to build on Canada's support for education of the world's most marginalized children. So there's a lot of money going overseas right now to countries like Bangladesh and foreign aid for education that Canadians are footing the bill for. Double our funding to grassroots women's rights organizations to continue to make significant investments in comprehensive sexual reproductive health services as well as the global care economy. They do a lot of foreign investments in reproductive education and health type stuff. I believe that we can't save the world from everything, and it would make sense to solve the issues at home first before you worry about elsewhere. Now, make sure, they say, provide greater assistance to people living with disabilities in developing countries. Well, I think you should provide greater service to people living with disabilities in this country. Again, it's all these things. It's like billions of dollars out the door, and they want to increase it for foreign aid. Make sure everyone pays their fair share. Raise income taxes on the largest, most profitable banks and insurance companies who earn more than $1 billion per year, and introduce a temporary Canada recovery dividend that these companies would pay in recognition of the fact that they recovered fast and stronger than many other industries. Again, the banks actually profited quite well during all this time. So it's not necessarily a bad idea. It's always concerning when the government gets to pick and choose, though. Create a minimum tax rule so that everyone who earns enough to qualify for the top tax bracket pays at least 15% per year. Remove their ability to artificially pay no tax through excessive use of deductions and credits. Again, not necessarily a bad idea. I know that I can tell you tricks right now. If you have money and you're at the top end tax bracket and you want, you don't want to pay that a higher tax bracket. I know people that, through my dad's business, that they're talking about how to avoid excessive tax, and one of the things they did was they bought a jet, because by buying a jet they were able to write off the gas expenses, different things. They were able to write off the jet against as a business expense against their profits, and so it dropped. It was made actual financial sense for them to buy a jet, as crazy as that sounds. So there is something to be said about getting the excessive deductions. I'm all an advocate of a flat tax system for this reason, of taking all the fairness out of just up to an excessive amount, and that excessive amount should be upwards of about $300,000 in my mind, because doctors are in around the 200-250 range. They shouldn't be included in a top tax bracket, because that's still, to me, working class. We get in above that, we started, it's not a perfect system, but that's where the two tiers would lie for me. What do we got? Implement a tax on luxury cars, boats, planes, as outlined in a budget in 2021. Conservatives say they may implement a tax on luxury vehicles, second luxury homes, to protect the environment. So similar in that sense. Modernize the general anti-avoidance rule regime in order to focus on economic substance and restrict the ability of federally regulated institutions, including financial institutions such as banks, insurance companies, to use tier structures as a form of corporate tax planning that flows Canadian-derived profit through entities. That's right over my head, so I didn't even know I read that accidentally. Significantly increase the resources of the Canada Revenue Agency to combat aggressive tax planning and tax avoidance that allows the wealthiest Canadians to avoid paying the taxes they owe. This will increase CRA's resources by up to $1 billion per year, they say, in order to close Canada's tax gap. Again, I think simplifying the tax system is how you actually prevent these people from avoiding the tax system. I don't think you need increased scrutiny. In fact, a simplified tax system means less employees to have to worry about who's following the tax system. Because if it's very simple, of like, you earned under this, you pay this. There is no deductions, which is really on personal tax, that's the way it should work. When business tax, it's a little more complicated, but they want to get more control over how it's overseen, and then they say we'll go after these big rich people. But at the end of the day, the simplified tax system gets around that, because it makes it harder for them to hide things in a overly complex tax system. All right, we'll close out. Work with our international partners to implement a global minimal tax so that the biggest companies in the world are not able to escape the taxes they owe here in Canada. Not sure what a global minimal tax would look like, but there you have it. The Liberals talk about it there. And that's pretty much it. We've pretty much gone through almost every major point of the Liberal government's platform. So an hour, 43 minutes. If I'm easier to listen to than Justin Trudeau, and you want to know what's in the Liberal platform, this is probably the best way to do it. Again, look for some short clips coming soon. But we just went through the entire Liberal platform. This is the basis to understand what they're advocating for, the direction of the country. Big things like the COVID vaccine passport mandates, obviously, net zero, carbon taxes. We know those are big. And then there's some things that in there that kind of make sense, like the recycling idea of 80% of Canada's recyclers actually having to be able to have a market and be able to recycle that for it to be considered recyclable. That kind of makes sense to me, but it's not a straight cut answer either. This was, they say the last one here, use the government's buying power to set standards and norms, requiring suppliers of goods and services to apply the highest ethical and sustainability standards across their supply chains. Again, That they're not talking about how that comes, but if they're serious on that, there's huge implications to that language. If you have to apply the highest ethical and sustainability standards across their supply chains, and that means they're probably going to be the most expensive. It's just the reality. I'm not saying we won't, as a company, I wouldn't personally want to go with the most ethically sourced, but if you're already in business, I can tell you, like where I worked doing electrical supplies, they got a lot of stuff from China. Why? Because it was a lot cheaper. And if they didn't have the other stuff, they weren't going to be able to get business. Now, if the government mandates it, says everybody has to do it, what will happen is now everybody's going to have to pay more on builds, and that it trickles down, right? So there's effects to all this stuff, and that will be a big effect if we're going to require that across all supply chains. They say they will further strengthen federal procurement policies to integrate human rights, environment, social, and corporate governance principles in supply chain transparency and ensure they apply to both core government agency, crown corporations, yada, yada, yada. Saying you admire China is still in the back of my head, so it's hard for me to believe a lot of what this is in the liberal platform. But again, we went through the entire liberal platform. I'm going to run through the questions here, or the comments here, and then we'll close up the stream. What do we got? Sorry, I missed a lot here. Trina. Yeah, so political wording, you're not quite saying things exactly the way you mean them, like how will you achieve them. And it's like the political non-speak. They say a lot and they never really say anything. And by the end of it, you're like, well, did they answer my question? And you almost have to think about it. It's almost impressive in a way how they're able to answer questions long-windedly without really saying anything at all. It's always kind of impressed me about politicians. Not in a good way, but it's impressed me. So yeah, I used to be a liberal voter, voted from very beginning, only time I've ever voted. I feel ashamed now that I did. This will be the second time I've ever voted, and I've never been so scared at where this country is headed. It is definitely interesting times. I mean, I think in an older life, if I'd been born 40, 50 years ago, I would be what would be considered a classical liberal. I think there's a place from time to time for fiscal, for federal programs to help people, but I also think a lot of times the help programs hurt people. And there's a balancing act. You need to be fiscally responsible. He doesn't care about our indigenous peoples. What do we got? School. 3, less government is good. My personal belief is government generally sucks at most of what they do, and so it's not necessarily a good thing to expand them. Let's get down the cases here. There's an election. The sneaking conservatives want to make abortion illegal. I'm not sure about that. I'm going to have to look back into the platform because that would be something that's kind of buried in speak if it is there. Yeah, so continue with high immigration. We will never achieve that. Yeah, supply and demand, you're right. There needs to be balance there, and it's hard to increase housing supply when 350,000 people coming into the country every year and there's already shortages. You need at least a moratorium of lower numbers for a period of time to catch up, right? And you can't have that conversation without being accused of being a racist or something else. We are constantly talking and promote about limiting government. You must constantly talk and promote about limiting government, especially central government. I agree. Don't build in the boreal forest. Don't build on prime agricultural land. And we have no passports. Hey, Craig. And recycling is costly at the end of the line. You're right. And so this is one of the things that gets missed, and I'll touch on that and leave you with it. It's like just because something can be recycled doesn't mean it's actually good for it. Like there's certain things that it's very expensive to recycle. And so the solution, again, in my mind, is not the government telling you we're going to punish you if you do X, Y, or Z. It's to incentivize the right thing. So there needs to be a cost benefit analysis. Like, what are the things that look most environmentally friendly, that are the most sustainable? Because even if you don't buy into the catastrophic global climate change argument, what I do understand and buy into is that we have limited numbers of resources and we need to be good stewards of them. We need to be good stewards of them because we want to be able to have a good quality of life for as long as possible. So when it comes to these things, it's like rather than punish them, incentivize the right decisions. Like what is the right decision? All right. And they're not even asking those questions. They're just saying these generic blanket statements on climate change, like we're going to put a price on pollution. And then it just means that they get a bunch more money to decide what they're going to do with green initiatives. And that's a very loose term, rather than be like, what are the things that are actually make sense for businesses that need to happen? And how would we get them to do that without hurting their bottom line? And if that's the conversation, then I can get behind it. But right now, that's not the conversation in politics. Like, we need to be good stewards of the land. We need to make sure that when we are extracting minerals, resources, oil, all these things, we're not tainting water. We're not tainting the quality of the environment around it. Ideally, like, everything's a trade-off in life. We can't take something without having a cost. The idea is that we only take what we need to an extent. Like, capitalism has issues with that because it's profit driven. So it's like, how do you drive profit and do what's best? But take what you need on a limited amount and do your best to be good stewards of the environment around it, so that it's not something that hurts the environment around it or the people around it or the business. Like, you need to make sure it's best for everything going forward. There's always going to be a cost, but yes, it's not easy to do. Yeah, that sometimes is true, right? Right decisions include not always doing something. Sometimes helping is hurting, and sometimes the right decision is not always doing the thing that people are calling to do. Again, like, we have politics by polling right now, not politics by leadership. And they're not trying to drive conversations on these topics. They're just trying to they're just blanket statements that make people feel good to get involved behind certain things, but they're not really talking about the issues. If the reality is, if 70% of Canadians said that they wanted to be do all these things that were going to hurt them over the next 5 years, the government would think it's a great thing and they would go and do it, because they're not talking big picture. They're not looking at all the costs associated and looking at things from a leadership perspective. They're looking at it from a polling perspective. Have you looked at all the platforms? Pretty much, Craig. The only one I really haven't had time to go through is the NDP, in green a little bit. NDP was, I've gone through some of it, but pretty light in a lot of things. Like, if Liberal platform didn't give a lot of detail as to how they actually accomplish things, then the NDP platform really doesn't. It's just like generic statements of like, we'll provide this and then we'll tax these people, and it's kind of super generic in general. But yeah, we'll close out here. Thank you everybody for joining Diverge Media, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again.